Trace Anthony's argument and use of the preamble to support her claim in, after being convicted of voting, by evaluating whether her reasoning is sound and supported by relevant and sufficient evidence. In this lesson, you will learn how to evaluate an author's claim by determining if the claim is supported by sound reasoning with relevant and sufficient evidence. Let's review. We've been reading and rereading the speech after being convicted of voting. Remember, this speech was written and given in 1872 by Susan B. Anthony, a pioneer for women's rights and suffragist. She gave this stump speech in all 29 postal districts of Monroe County, New York, during the 1872 presidential election. Let's also review what we know about good readers. Good readers distinguish between claims that are supported by reasons and evidence from claims that are not. Today we will be evaluating Susan B. Anthony's speech using these steps. 1. Trace the author's argument in your own words. Summarize the claim, evidence, and reasoning. 2. Ask, what lingering questions do I have about the author's evidence and reasoning? And 3. Now ask, does the author provide enough soundly reasoned evidence to support the claim despite these questions? Jot down a few notes about your thinking. So today I need to evaluate Susan B. Anthony's claim. Is her reasoning sound with relevant and sufficient evidence? Since the question is asking me to evaluate her claim by looking at her evidence and reasoning, I know I'm going to have to reread the whole text to make sure I find examples of her evidence and reasoning. I also am going to have to use all my notes and annotations I have taken so far. My first step is to trace the author's argument in my own words, summarizing the claim, evidence, and reasoning. I am going to use many of my notes from the other days. First, I want to grab my notes from day 1 when I identified the author's purpose or claim. I also want to grab my notes from day 2 when I looked at Anthony's evidence. Finally, I want to grab my annotated text from day 3 when I looked at Anthony's structure, where we coded the text and mapped out exactly how Anthony presented her claim, evidence, and reasoning. All that good thinking and note-taking is really going to be helpful to me now when I trace her argument. Looking at my annotated text of the structure, I see Anthony began with her claim. So I'm going to pull up the text where I highlighted her claim and quickly reread what I highlighted. Then I'm going to jot down her claim in my own words. Going back to my annotated text, I see Anthony continued by citing her evidence. Just like before, I'm going to pull up these notes and reread them. Then I'm going to jot down the evidence in my own words. She also brings in some additional evidence from the second page. Remember when she cites the definition of a citizen? I am also going to jot this down. Finally, I'm going to tackle the reasoning. I'm going to use the annotations from the text. I'm going to reread these and summarize her arguments on my own paper. I will need to start a new paper since this will take more room. Anthony certainly provides many reasons to support her claim. Wow, what a lot of work to summarize her argument. This good thinking will set us up for the next step. Now comes the hard part. I have to look at my summary of Anthony's argument and think if I have any lingering questions. Well, one part that I have a question about is Anthony's evidence. While she has 2 pieces of evidence, the first one, the preamble of the United States Constitution, is really the piece of evidence she reasons about. My question is, what if the reader doesn't agree with her interpretation of the word we? My last step is to ask myself, does the author provide enough soundly reasoned evidence to support the claim despite these questions? Now remember, my question is, what if the audience doesn't agree with her reasoning about the we in We the People being all people, men and women? Well, let me think. Is there enough other evidence if people don't agree with her first piece of reasoning? Here is what I'm thinking. 1. Anthony spends a great deal of time reasoning about we, about 3 paragraphs. 2. Anthony says only one sentence reasoning about the definition of a citizen. 3. Anthony is really relying on her audience to accept her interpretation of we as all people. And 4. So I'm back to my question. What if they do not? I really feel that Anthony hasn't provided enough reasoning about her other piece of evidence to outweigh this question. At last I have completed the 3 steps and I'm going to go back to our focus question. Trace Anthony's argument and use of the preamble to support her claim and after being convicted of voting by evaluating whether her reasoning is sound and supported by relevant and sufficient evidence. I have done a lot of thinking and luckily annotated the text and wrote down some notes. I will use both to help me answer this question. Anthony uses the preamble of the United States Constitution as evidence to support her claim that, in voting, I not only committed no crime, but instead simply exercised my citizens' rights. She builds her entire argument from the line, "We the people," insisting this line refers to all people, not just white men or just men. She continues, "And we formed it to secure them, our blessings of liberty, not to the half of ourselves and the half of our posterity, but to the whole people, women as well as men." Susan B. Anthony used the words of the preamble as evidence that both men and women have rights to liberty and therefore are guaranteed the right to vote. Anthony's use of evidence and reasoning is sound. The Founding Fathers did not specify who we was in the preamble, and therefore it is reasonable to assume we refers to all citizens of the United States, men and women. It then follows that if women are citizens, they have the right to vote. Furthermore, passing a law denying women the right to vote is to pass a bill of attainder, or an ex post facto law. These laws are forbidden in the United States Constitution. The passing of such laws is illegal. Although Anthony's evidence and reasoning are sound, Anthony does not supply enough evidence to support her claim. Her entire claim is based on the belief that we, in We the People, refers to all people, men and women. However, if the reader does not agree with this initial statement, the rest of her reasoning is irrelevant. In paragraph 6, Anthony could have made her claim stronger by referring back to the idea that women are part of this we, since they are part of the governed. In addition, Anthony briefly cites Webster, Worcester's, and Bouvier's definition of a citizen, yet fails to provide reasoning as to the relevance of each definition. The reader is left asking, so what? Overall, Anthony's use of evidence and reasoning is sound, but her claim is insufficiently supported. Providing additional evidence would have made her argument stronger. In addition, Anthony could have supported her listeners' readers' comprehension by clearly explaining how she interpreted the evidence as support for her claim. Let's review our steps. 1. Trace the author's argument in your own words. Summarize the claim, evidence, and reasoning. 2. Ask, what lingering questions do I have about the author's evidence and reasoning? And 3. Now ask, does the author provide enough soundly reasoned evidence to support the claim despite these questions? Jot down a few notes about your thinking. In this lesson, you have learned how to evaluate an author's claim by determining if the claim is supported by sound reasoning with relevant and sufficient evidence.